Hello, I'm Bob Lowe. I'm the president of the Canadian Cattlemen's Association, and with me is Alistair MacGregor, ag critic for the NDP party from British Columbia.
Nice to meet you.
So, how are you today, Alistair?
Really well, actually. It's been good to get back to work here in Ottawa, and looking forward to the 44th Parliament. You know, we've been at it for a couple of weeks, but see how the new year goes when we get back to it.
What are your party's priorities for agriculture in the 44th Parliament?
Well, for me, I would really like to place agriculture at the center of the environmental and climate change debate that we're having. I have heard repeatedly over the last number of years that I've been an agriculture critic, farmers keep on telling us that they are on the front lines of climate change. And I think for too long we have been looking at punitive measures, especially with respect to agriculture, on how we're going to solve the climate crisis, because we know many farms are still very reliant on fossil fuel use, and we don't yet have commercially viable alternatives. I know they are being developed, but I think also agriculture can play an incredibly important role in sequestering carbon, right? Taking it out of the atmosphere where it's causing so much havoc and putting it in the ground. And so I'm a big believer in promoting healthy soil conservation, and really trying to illustrate to the broader Canadian public that through various agricultural techniques, whether it's how we plant our crops, how we allow cattle to graze in our beautiful grasslands, we have a real potential here at making agriculture one of our greatest tools in fighting climate change. I think the other priority for me is the last couple of years with COVID have shown a number of shocks to the system. So I think we can learn a lot of lessons from that and really try through various policy initiatives to try and build resiliency into the system. You know, look at what the worst case scenario can be and try and plan for that.
Thank you. That's great. I mean, us that are farmers and ranchers in Canada realize what we can do and where we need to be, and if the government can realize that and put us as part of the conversation, because we're where it starts. So.
Absolutely.
Thank you for that.
Yeah.
Sorry, it's too far away. How do you see yourself partnering with the Canadian beef industry as a key part to the solution of fighting climate change?
Yeah, I was really fortunate to get a first-hand education on how Canada's beef farmers are interacting with the environment and the good work that they are doing. In the summer of 2020, I was invited to the Okanagan region in southern British Columbia. I took a tour of two ranches that had previously won sustainability awards. They were real leaders in rotational grazing techniques. And I think what we have to understand is successful agriculture is agriculture that closely mimics natural processes, right? Mother Nature already has the blueprint for us, and that blueprint really means a close interaction between plants and animals. And I think what we've understood through Canada's history, especially when Canada's native bison population was removed, that had a pretty detrimental impact on Canada's prairie. And so we have to have an understanding of that symbiotic relationship between large herbivores and Canada's natural grasslands. They depend on one another for regeneration. And when people have to understand, like when you have grasses reaching a certain length, they have a commensurate amount of root growth underneath. And even when the grass is cut back, that root may die off, but all of that carbon which has been taken out of the atmosphere still stays in the soil. So, and of course, cattle are fertilizing as they go. They mix up the ground. They allow a whole variety of different species to come up. So I think really understanding that rotational grazing techniques and the huge carbon sequestration potential that Canada's natural grasslands have, that's going to lead to a better conversation on how we conserve and protect those areas, but also show that having cattle farming in those areas is actually a beneficial effect and will actually preserve them.
And that's, we've been saying that for quite a while. It's really nice to hear you saying it.
It's about time the policymakers stood up and listened.
Yeah, and it's all good, and you said working with Mother Nature. If Mother Nature will always win, So if you try and go against Mother Nature, you're gonna lose.
Yes, and maybe we'll have to learn that lesson the hard way.
Yeah. So what is your party's plan to include the beef sector in Canada's economic recovery?
I think it's an incredibly important part. Again, if you look over the last couple of years at what COVID did, especially with our beef processing centers, right? We have a situation in Canada, like, with the Cargills of the world, where a lot of our processing capacity, I think, was too centralized and too concentrated, and that was very much a weak link in the system, because when the Cargill plant in Alberta went down because many of its workforce members were infected by COVID, that caused a huge rolling backlog. And so as a part of our economic recovery, I think it's going to be very beneficial to the beef industries if we look at that model and find ways that we can maybe spread the processing capacity out so not all of our eggs are in one basket. Our agriculture committee in the previous parliament really took a very close and in-depth look at Canada's processing capacity and made a number of recommendations for how Ottawa can make strategic investments through tools like the Local Food Infrastructure Fund. So I think just having that resiliency in the system, making sure that we've got backups to future problems that might exist, that's not only going to help Canada's beef industry weather future storms, but I think it's also going to allow you to recover in a much faster way and really take advantage of the opportunities that are out there. So yeah, I mean, the Agriculture Committee, I think, did a lot of the hard work. We took a lot of feedback from witnesses such as the Canadian Cattlemen's Association, and I hope that the recommendations we made are a faithful representation of the testimony we received.
Well, that's any disaster, you have to learn something from it, and
yeah, otherwise it's a wasted opportunity.
Hopefully we learn something from the pandemic.
Yeah.
Roughly 50% of Canadian beef production is exported. What trade and market access opportunities do you see for the sector, and how will your party help address some of the current trade imbalances and challenges that we face?
So I'll start with the challenges and the imbalances. I mean, it's no secret the United States is our biggest trading partner, and of course right now the country of origin labeling issue is coming up because of various legislative initiatives down in the United States. We've had a few worrying comments made by members of the Biden administration, and it's going to be, I hope it's not going to be a repeat of what we saw a few years ago. The beef industry in North America is highly integrated, and so I think in addressing that challenge, we really need to fundamentally re-examine the path our relationship with the United States has gone, because I don't think we have that level of engagement from the cabinet level down to the legislative level. So I think more effort has to be made, not only to re-engage diplomatically, but we should have more high-level cabinet trips down to the United States. But also I think members of the House of Commons and Senate need to make more of an effort to reach out to their counterparts in the US Congress to make them understand that, if we're fighting one another, we both end up losing. And there's more of a case to be made for Canada and the United States to cooperate facing challenges that we see in other parts. Second part of your question, it's really hard to peer into a crystal ball because of all the challenges we see around the world, but there's always a strong case to be made for more diversification. So we should be beefing up our staffing in Canadian embassies overseas, making sure we understand the local markets and culture, and really trying to find those opportunities to find new export markets. And that can help us weather future storms.
You said something very interesting there, to get ministers, cabinet people down into other countries and look around. The way you build trust is you have to go there, and you have to talk to people. And instead of meeting in Nebraska last week, Cattlemen's meeting, and you could have picked up that room with the people in it and moved it into the Sheraton in Calgary, and it was exactly the same thing.
Yeah.
And that's the relationships where our industry is. It's basically completely integrated.
I think those personal relationships are a huge part of successful negotiations.
They are.
Yeah.
In the cattle industry and in government and in everything else. So.
Totally, yeah.
Well, last and not least, what are your priorities for the next policy framework?
Yeah, that's a great one. Due in less than 2 years, 2023, because we're almost into 2022. We did also a very important study on the business risk management suite of programs, and I think some work has been done with the federal and provincial and territorial ministers. I think more could be done because the risk to agriculture out there is still pretty high, and I think we don't do a good enough job of addressing what future challenges and risks can be. We're very good at looking at the current landscape, but I think successful planning and policy has to look at what are the challenges and risks 5, 10, 20 years from now, and I think we need a suite of programs that are adaptable, nimble, and able to change to an evolving situation. The other thing too is if I could pick a theme for this next agricultural partnership, it would be on resiliency. I like to use that word a lot, but I think it really encapsulates the challenges we've had over the last 2 years. That's a very broad term to use, and I choose a deliberatively broad term because I think under that rubric there's a lot of different policy things that we can do, but overall we need to find ways to build a resilient agricultural system so that there's some sense of security and comfort that no matter what challenges come our way, we're going to be able to face them together.
That's you talk about the resiliency and you talk about programs that are there, and I think that's a very big part of it. Rather than set aside's a classic example. We've used it, it works.
Yeah.
When it came time we needed it again, we had to rebuild it again, and something like that should be sitting on a shelf when whatever parameters are triggered, it just comes off the shelf. It's just there.
Yeah, for sure.
And that's nimbleness is what the word you used, which was a good one.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, well, thank you very much.
Yeah, very much appreciated. Thank you.